ESOPs, employee-owned companies. Many construction companies either explore this option or try the option out in terms of a transition strategy for their organization. But lots of construction companies struggle executing an ESOP successfully. In the past, we've talked about ESOPs from the perspectives of outside folks who have some ideas on how construction companies can be successful with that. But today's episode is unique because we're actually going to talk to the president and CEO of an ESOP in the construction industry who is successfully executing that ESOP at the moment. My guest is Herb Sargent, the president and CEO of Sargent, and they are a company out of Maine in the United States. And today we have a very, very interesting conversation. It's extremely important that you listen to this if you're interested in an ESOP in any way, because we're going to talk about the importance of making sure that your runway for ownership transition and for management or leadership transition is distinguished in order to execute an ESOP successfully. We're going to talk about why it's important to identify the why of the ESOP, and Herb's why is unique. We're also going to talk about how you go about the process of exploring an ESOP. It's not for every company. And that's why it's very important for you to understand the mechanics of an ESOP and to identify a mentor in your particular construction vertical, a mentor from the outside, a company, in other words, that's already doing it, so that you can look at the whys and the wherefores, the pros and the cons of an ESOP structure. And really one of the key words that we come up with in this interview is the word transparency. Herb has practiced transparency with his people, telling them the realities of an ESOP at the beginning and the potential for an ESOP at the end of someone's career journey. And he has succeeded in communicating that to his people through transparency, and that has really helped him in inculcating the ESOP within his organization. So we're going to dive into the interview right now. Herb is very generous with his time and his insights. I appreciate him coming on the show. Do me a favor, share this interview with anyone that you think would be interested in the mechanics and the implementation of an ESOP in a construction company. And of course, feel free to reach out to where you get your podcasts and give us a rating or a review. It really helps us to be seen across the internet and get Construction Genius out to a bunch of people. Thank you for listening today. Enjoy my interview with Herb. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Herb, welcome to Construction Genius.
Good afternoon, Eric. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. This subject we're going to talk about is one that I've got a lot of passion around.
That's beautiful. Let's dive right in then. The subject today is ESOPs and construction companies. And I figured I'd bring you on the show because you are a real-life construction company executive who has an ESOP.
As it turns out, it's been a long road, but I've been an ESOP for about 8 years now, and it's really turned into a really excellent benefit for our employees.
Excellent. And again, the reason I'm interested in talking to you is I've had consultants or outside folks on the show before talking about an ESOP, but I haven't had a construction CEO who's actually living and breathing it right now. So can you give us some background of yourself and your company and how you came to the point of becoming an ESOP?
Sure. I'll start back at the founding of the company, but I'll be quick with it. My grandfather founded our company in 1926, and through the 40s, 50s, 60s, did a lot of interstate work, airport work, that sort of stuff. And then in the 70s, my dad and my uncle took over. My dad, Jim, and my uncle, Ralph, took over the business. And then as the 1980s wore on, they were trying to figure out how to make succession happen, ownership transition. And they were approached by a company from Paris, France, to buy them. They ended up selling to this company. It was called Rizal Frères. It was the Rizal brothers. And that was in 1988. I stayed for 3 years, and I was working on a large project there. And then I left and started my own business. So the previous family business was called Sargent Corporation. I started my own business with my brother called Sargent and Sargent.
I see.
And then in 2005, in the interim, I had bought my brother out of that company. But in 2005, we had an opportunity to buy H.E. Sargent, which was, we were doing about 15 to 20 million in volume a year, and H.E. Sargent was doing about 8 times that. So we had an opportunity to buy the company. Immediately when we bought the company, I began to think about, okay, now I got this, I own this company. It's great, but someday I've got to get out. And I have 2 children that have no dreams of being in the construction business. They have other dreams that I respect greatly. And I just knew that I had to find a way. So we began to look at all the options.
It's interesting to me because, you know, you're what, in your 40s when you bought the business back?
42, yeah.
Yeah, so relatively young in terms of, you know, your career path. You've got another 20 years in, and immediately you start talking about or thinking about succession and what you're going to do with the business once you're done. That strikes me as kind of unusual for a lot of folks. They don't really start thinking about that immediately.
So my dad, I believe, retired when he was 52. That's when they sold the business. And I wasn't looking to retire at that time, but I didn't want to have to go through the same thing over again. When you decide to get out of a construction company, there's really about, near as I can tell, 4 different ways. You can sell internally, which has its own limitations. You can sell externally, which had taken place before, and it wasn't an ideal situation for the employees. You can just cease operations and liquidate, which is really no good for anybody. Or you can go into the ESOP. Selling internally was a consideration, but a construction company, especially a heavy highway construction company, is very capital intensive.
Yes.
And so there are not a lot of people inside the company that have the type of personal capital structure that allows them to carry on the surety credit that is required. So that wasn't really an option. Even though it was a possibility, it wasn't really an option in this case.
So let me ask you then, let me just take you a little bit back into the 80s when the company was sold to the French company. What was your emotional response to that at the time? How did you feel about that sale and your involvement in the company?
So I was a superintendent in the company, and I didn't own any shares in the company. I was an employee, and the company I grew up right beside the company. I mean, this company was really one of the only stable things in my whole upbringing was this company. And, you know, my dad was pretty close to the vest on the thing, and he actually told me the day before they sold.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I was 25 years old, so a young guy, right? But you kind of, in your mind, maybe I can run this thing someday.
Yeah.
And there were never any promises. In fact, there were probably more promises to the opposite because, but it was an emotional thing for me because I took it like, well, maybe these guys don't think I can do this. And I probably had given them enough reasons to believe that too, frankly. Right. But so it was a disappointment for me. But, you know, I moved on. My grandfather was still alive. He was 85 at the time, I think, or 82. And he was always pretty pragmatic about looking forward and not looking back. So I just, you know, kept my nose to the grindstone and kept working as a superintendent / project manager and worked, finished the job I was on. And then moved on.
How did as you thought about the experience that the employees went through as a result of the sale and the impact upon them, how did that influence your decision when you bought back the company to go to the ESOP model as opposed to look for that external sale or even the internal sale? The internal one you've already explained, but tell me a bit about that, please.
Yeah, that was the thing about ESOP. If you can set it up right, you are in control. You know, you get to stay in control.
Right.
And when you sell out to someone else, I don't care what kind of handshakes and agreements you have, things can change on the other side that change that relationship and also your relationship with your own companies. And that's really what happened with H.E. Sargent. The parent company that bought us immediately fell on very difficult financial times. They began to make, you know, to send edicts across from Paris to the States, sell all your equipment, we need your cash. And it was a very difficult time. So I remembered that well. My dad retired because he said, I can't do this anymore. You're going to have to find somebody else.
Right. So you went and you started your own company. What was that like for you, starting your own company with your brother?
It was difficult. It was 1992. The economy was just terrible. And the only good thing about the economy is you could run an ad in the paper and get 200 applicants in the course of a week. Yeah. So much different that way than it is now. It was, you know, the company that I grew up in was in Maine, a big company, you know. Yeah. Before cell phones, we could pick up the two-way radio and call the home office and say, I need a trench box, I need an excavator, I need a dozer. And it just showed up, it was like magic. And going and starting my own business and getting a contract was daunting.
Right.
I had to go buy a shovel. I had to go buy a 100-foot tape. I had to go buy all the stuff that was always just kind of there.
Yeah,
It was always in my ether, and I had to go get all that stuff, trench box, pipe lasers, and it was daunting, but it was fun too.
Yeah, interesting. So you got to the point of being in a place where you were the sole owner of Sargent and Sargent, and then you had an opportunity to buy H.E. Sargent back.
Yes.
Why did you take that opportunity? Why didn't you just keep growing your company?
So H.E. Sargent had been a top line driven company.
Yeah.
Their owners. So now I mentioned that their parent company had financial difficulties. So they were bought by a larger company, which was then bought by a larger company in Germany. And now these Germans don't even know why they have an American subsidiary.
Yeah.
They were always top line driven, double your volume in 5 years, double your volume. And in the marketplace in Maine, we're on a little bit of an economic cul-de-sac up here. If you look at the map, you can see it. There's not a hell of a lot of work. And they started taking everything. And so me and my managers, I had picked up a couple really strong managers by that time, Tim Folster and George Thomas. And my managers and I said, if we don't do something, we're going to have to lay off half our crew and cut our company in half. So do we want to do that, or do we want to approach these folks and say, maybe we can play a game here, maybe we can make something happen? And it was a risky deal. When I left H.E. Sargent to begin with and started my business, I had to put all my chips in the middle of the table, right? I mean, everything's at risk, my house, my car, I didn't have much. And 14 years later, I'd been able to build up not a huge wealth, but a comfortable wealth. And now all went back in the middle of the table again. So it was kind of grueling, but also I knew a lot of the people there, felt like we were the way I was and the way they were aligned well from just a cultural standpoint and a trust standpoint. So our managers felt like we could make it work. And by the way, both of those managers had been with H.E. Sargent as well. Okay. So, we made it work. It was as I said, they were 8 times our size about in terms of volume. And it was a slog to get surety credit behind us.
Right.
Because the numbers didn't really justify it.
Yep.
So we had to do some artistic work. We bought the company and then immediately sold all the equipment to raise capital and then began to rent equipment and lease it. So there was a lot of artistic work that took place there. And, it was one of those things, the three of us looked at each other and we said, we've got one chance to get this right. And if we don't get it right, we're screwed.
Okay.
And luckily we got it right.
So I just want to explore this a little bit more because I find this dynamic interesting. So as you're thinking about the possibility of purchasing H.E. Sargent, and this is now, 15, 16 years after the original sale back in the 80s. Yep. What motivation, if any, did you have to sort of say, hey, listen, I know that I wasn't, put into a position of leadership and ownership at that point, but I've proved myself. And now I'm going to really benefit the other people who've been involved in H.E. Sargent all these years by coming in and purchasing the company. Was there any motivation there?
Well, number one, frankly, I hadn't really proved myself. I proved myself in the context of a small, very local site company. So I hadn't really proven myself. And in fact, I remember reading the bank write-up when they were talking about my line of credit, and it actually said Herb has yet to prove himself at this level. So fair enough, right? My grandfather was still alive at that time. He was 99 years old. And I went to see him, talk to him about it. And he said, Herb, if you can evaluate it on the business merits and it works, do it. But if you're doing this on emotion, don't do it.
That's interesting.
As I mentioned before, he was so pragmatic and so forward-looking, so he was a really good barometer.
Right.
And I also was able to tap onto a couple folks that were, my age now, but, in their late 50s that had been in the business for a while and, get advice. And so it seemed like if we can make this happen, it's going to be good. So excellent. It wasn't so much an ego thing. It was more, I think this will be good for the state of Maine. I think it'll be good for those employees. I think it'll be good for my employees. And, I'll probably do all right out of this whole thing too.
Okay. So let's move on then to the decision to go ESOP. I'd like you to just to break that down for us. What drove that decision? You could go internal, external, shut it down, or ESOP at some point, but there you are in your early 40s, kind of imitating your grandfather in a certain way, looking forward into the future, trying to be pragmatic about it. What drove the ESOP decision?
So it was, how do we perpetuate the company and deliver the most benefit to the people that are here building? Those are the two primary questions. How do we perpetuate the company, and how do we make the people that are here winners from that?
Okay.
And so
can I just ask you a quick question? Let me just ask you a question there. Why did you want to perpetuate the company?
I would say probably ego is involved in that.
Okay.
But it had been around so long already.
Yes.
I mentioned to you, it's the one thing that had always been in my life.
Yes.
And it had been around so long, such an institution in the construction world in Maine.
Yes.
And I just felt like very community minded, very, very people centric. And I just wanted to continue to grow those benefits to the community, to the people.
Okay. So keep going. You got this idea of perpetuating the company, but then also benefiting the employees.
Right.
Okay.
And, as we look, what do we want out of any transaction? We wanted the existing management to be able to stay in and keep things stable and minimize the trauma that goes like it had before. We like the tax efficiency of the ESOP. ESOPs pay no federal tax, and that really helps create financial stability. The culture remains intact across years, and that really benefits the employees. And we separated, as I mentioned before, the ownership transition and the management transition. And that gave us an opportunity to really take 10 years of ownership under the ESOP and figure out how to make the management succession take place.
Can you just explain that a little bit more, the separating the ownership transition from the management transition?
Yeah, so quite often in a sale of a company, it can happen before with H.E. Sargent when they sold the company. It was a year or two and they didn't get along anymore. So the management changed completely.
Right.
And we wanted to be able to have, as you mentioned, I was 50 when we went into the ESOP.
Right.
And I wanted to have a long runway ahead of me so that we could keep management stable. So there wasn't the trauma in the ranks that goes with the sale of a company to the outside. That trauma it's nothing changed. So some people would tell you today, 8 years later, nothing changed. We're just an employee owned now.
Okay, so let me ask you that question. It's kind of a specific one, but let's say I'm considering an ESOP. In your opinion, based on your experience, what kind of runway should the first generation that transitions into the ESOP, what kind of runway should they give themselves to remain in management to ensure that smooth turnover?
My opinion is at least 5 years.
Okay.
And I think the 10 years has worked well for us. I have seen ESOPs that, change management relatively quickly. I've seen a couple ESOPs that went ESOP partially and then went back out and I never really knew the reasons because people hold that pretty close to their vest. But after I became an ESOP in Maine, we were the first one for years and years and years that became an ESOP. And over the last 8 years, I've probably discussed it with 25 companies, and probably 15 to 20 of those have gone ESOP, and mostly with about 5 years of runway.
Okay, so that's an interesting question there too, because looking around you as you're considering ESOP, you don't necessarily have a bunch of examples in the immediate area. Where did you find the models or the mentors that helped you as you went through the ESOP transition?
That was so important to me, Eric, and that's a great question. There was an ESOP or two ESOPs that took place in the Bangor, Maine area, and they both failed within 3 years.
Oh.
So I was really concerned, and that was more of a fraudulent transaction.
Okay.
So I was really concerned that there may be some stigma associated with it. So before I would do any discussion internally, I wanted to do some due diligence on the behalf of my employees on what kind of how a construction company crew feels about an ESOP. And I was able to get to know a guy, Keith Bennett is his name, and he's with Emery Sapp and Sons out of Columbia, Missouri. And he was an ESOP, and we were in a peer group together. And I asked him if I could sit down with him. And he sat down. He showed me all his financials, everything we went out to Kansas City where one of their offices is, and he sat me down with about 20 of their employees, and he sat us down. There were three of us, and he said, he was about to walk out of the room, and he said, these guys, they can ask you any question they want, give them the answer straight up. And by the time we were done, it was an hour and a half, maybe we sat with these folks over lunch. And by the time we were done, I was like, these people, the energy they had around ESOP, this is what's going to work for my folks. And it was just such an important thing to be able to do that.
Okay, so you mentioned an important word there, the idea of energy.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, just working with companies that are ESOPs or are considering ESOPs, it does require a tremendous amount of energy to make the transition successfully. Where do you think people need to focus, or where did you focus as your energy as you're making that transition, so that your employees would begin to understand the benefits of the ESOP and begin to get excited about it? It's
a slow process, but to me, the number one thing is transparency. And so we set up a meeting for all our employees on a Saturday. We described what was going to happen. They all came in, and we had three different presentations. Our CFO did a presentation on what it was, mechanically how it worked. I did a presentation on why we were doing it. And then we had another panel discussion with, I think it was 5 employees from Emery Sapp and Sons, that they sent over to our folks so that they could ask, what about an ESOP? How does this work? And so that was a very important aspect of our people buying into it.
Okay, so that's really wise, it sounds like. So you get the CFO up, you get up, and then you have the folks from that mentor company, so to speak, come in and provide their feedback.
Right. We had done the math, and we said, if everything goes right this year, just so you know, if everything goes right, your value in the ESOP, the average employee will be $147.
$147.
Yeah. And we got a lot of grimaces, especially from a couple wives that were in the room that were like, we took a Saturday off to come hear this, and understandably so. But if I can get into a little bit of the details of it, the minutia,
please.
Kind of like the best analogy I can provide. It's like, let's say you and your brother, if you had a brother, are working for me, and I own a $1 million apartment complex. And you guys are working for me, and I say to you, okay, I'm putting this company in an ESOP, and it's worth $1 million. I'm going to hold a note for $1 million. You're going to pay me off over time. So the first day, your equity in that transaction is zero. You're nearly zero, right? You haven't paid me back anything. So the two ways you can build equity are to pay me back and to increase the value of that you can do things to raise the rent. You can work hard. So there is very, very little value up front the way our ESOP was structured, because I took 100% note. The company owed me 100% of the purchase price, and I had a 20-year balloon payment. So it builds slowly, but it does build over time. So the initial years are as we all work to increase the value of the company, and that's where the equity comes from. And then following, when they start paying down promissory note, you build equity like that, just like you do in a house or a car or anything else.
Okay, so that it's important for them to understand, because they may be, when you explain the ESOP to them, to any employee, they may be overwhelmed by the amount, because they're thinking, where am I going to get that money from? And so it's important for them to understand the logic of, as you increase the value of the company, that's how the note gets paid off, and that's how they begin to build equity in the business.
Correct, because we did get the question, like, can I invest? Can I buy stock in the company? Well, you cannot. I suppose there are some ESOP structures where you could, but in ours you could not. So it was just, as we continue to build the business, that's where the value comes from. So nobody could put any money in. Nobody did put any money in. This is literally value that comes out of thin air when you set up the ESOP.
Yep, interesting. So just to back up to one very important point, people hear the stories of the ESOPs of the owners who create an ESOP just because it's a way for them to cash out. And it seems like the ones, as I've, read about it over the years, it's those ESOPs that really struggle because it's just a means for the owner to get money.
Yeah. So when we went to Kansas City, my mentor, Keith, hooked me up with his ESOP attorney. And this was 2013. The economy was awful. And he said to me, you need to wait 5 years and get back up to your previous level of profitability. And you can probably get twice as much money. And he had a flip chart beside him. And I said, write a number on that flip chart that you suspect I can get today. And he wrote a number. And I looked at my CFO and my COO, and I said, I don't need more money than that.
Right.
I don't know how I would feel if I took the run up for 5 years and then dumped it on the employees. I wouldn't be able to sleep it. So we did it at that point in time, specifically because I wanted the employees to benefit from the run up. And you alluded to this. It's the ones where the people want to get all the cash out they can that cripples the ESOP, because it's either paid out too much in cash and now its capital structure isn't good enough to carry on, or it's ongoing payments that it has to make, just cripple it.
So with that idea of the run-up, was that something that you communicated to your employees, that even though we're in this particular economic situation right now, this is where we anticipate it going? How did you handle that?
I didn't really address that with them. Basically, for me to address it with them at that time, to me, would have been a little bit of chest thumping on my part.
Sure.
And I didn't want to do that. My address, I did say, this is not some grand act of generosity by Herb Sargent. It's
Right.
not what this is. This is me selling you folks my company. And
Right.
You're getting a good deal. It's been valued fairly. You're getting a good deal. And that's the way it's going to be.
Okay. When you first announced the ESOP, how many employees decided this is not a fit for me, I'm going to go work somewhere else?
I don't recall anybody saying we've got to leave because of this. In construction, especially in Maine, it's seasonal for us. So we have a fairly high degree of turnover, but nobody said, yeah, I don't want any part of that.
Right. So
Even though there was very little value to it. And it's hard to get much energy around $147.
Yeah. So that's a good question there. In thinking about the seasonality of the business, how then does the seasonality of the business affect people's ability to build value in the ESOP?
They think about that question. It's when they're working, they can build value. If
Right.
they're seasonally laid off, in some ways they understand that layoff has to take place. And even though they're not being paid now, it eventually will mean a higher ESOP value than if we kept everybody on not doing anything. So they do understand that, that as a company, we have to watch the cost. I think on an individual basis, sometimes people, get more concerned about themselves. But it really has only been the last 2 or 3 years where the stock price has gone really well. And, it started out as $1 in 2013, and it went down that year. We lost money and it went down to 67 cents. And then it went up to $1.20, so it doubled, right? Up to $1.20. And this past year, I think it was $93.70. So it's really gone up a lot. And people have seen each year they get allocated some stock shares. So, and that new price gets applied to all the stock shares that they've ever accumulated. So, if they get 40 shares a year, that new price goes against all those shares that they've accumulated. And we have people now, one of the things I told them back in 2013 is this will not be your retirement. This is not going to be, you still need to do a 401k. We still are matching your 401k. We're not going to do any of that. This will be your bass boat.
Okay.
This will augment your retirement. And I got a really neat message from one of the guys this past spring when our statements went out. And he said, whoa, I'm going to need a bigger boat.
That's cool.
Because these values now are all of a sudden where they were $5,000, $8,000 3 years ago, they're $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, a few over 100. So it's really begun to go well. Now people are starting to get really interested. And we had our ESOP valuation company on our internal podcast. And, we said, okay, tell our folks what makes value for them. And he said, well, the easiest way I can say it is every dollar you make or every dollar you save multiplies by 6. And that adds to the value of your company. Not the stock price, but the overall entity value. So now a guy walking down the street sees a grade stake on the side of the road that's worth $1, and he goes, "Wow, that's $6 for the value of the company." And it's really begun to take a hold, and people are getting excited about it.
So this to me is one of the keys to an effective ESOP is how you communicate the value and this idea of the transparency. This is not your retirement. This is a bass boat, and then that idea of them being able to link specific actions to the value of the company and therefore to the value of the ESOP shares that they hold.
Yes, it was a really, and we didn't even have that question queued up in our podcast. It was one I think our CFO asked our valuation guy while he was on, and that just hit, And so we can talk about that a lot now. we can have our plan of the day meeting in the morning, and the superintendent or one of the employees can say, hey, watch that chain over there. Make sure that doesn't get buried. That chain is $600 to the value of the company.
Where did you get the idea of the internal podcast?
When the pandemic struck us last year ago in March, the managers got together at the office on a Saturday, and we tried to figure out what's going to happen. We got to communicate with our folks. And we said, we'll send an email out. Well, I don't know about you, but my email box gets inundated with much more than I can handle.
Yes.
And most people's do. And what we find is we can send requests to our employees to fill out this for insurance purposes or whatever, and they never answer. They just don't read. And that was on a Saturday. By Monday, there were a bunch of changes that we had we had to put into place already just from Saturday. And so I had been on a podcast with Aaron Witt a few weeks before, and I called him and I said, tell me what you got for equipment. I got to start a podcast for internal. I got to be able to communicate. And so Tasha, our CFO, Tasha Gardner, and I got on the first podcast in mid-March of 2020 and got it out. And we've been doing them weekly ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. You're the first construction company I've heard with an internal podcast. So those of you who are out there listening, wanting to communicate, take a note of what Herb's doing there. That's terrific.
Well, for me, I think it's really, really working for us. We've got about 400 employees and we get about 325 listens every week. So, we could never achieve that level. And we can see each day how many people, you probably know this, you can see each day how many people listen. And you can see it goes out on Thursday, a lot of listens, Friday, a little bit less, Saturday, a little bit less, Sunday, there's a little spike. And then on Monday, when everybody gets in talking, it spikes up again.
Nice.
I can almost picture them. Hey, did you listen to the podcast this week? So we try to put a lot of good benefit information in the podcast, a lot of good, company news type of stuff.
That's beautiful. Okay, let's. I really like that. I just had to take that detour. Let's dive back into the ESOP there. What are you focusing on every day in terms of communicating the ESOP life to your employees? What's sort of the themes of your communication?
We're really trying to promote that we're all building life together.
Yep.
That each person brings value to the others, and every single one of us is a leader in the company, and that as leaders we have a responsibility to the others because we have a direct, maybe in some cases, a direct impact on others' financial trajectory, if not their operational trajectory. So that's really what it's about: is building a life together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So if I'm exploring an ESOP then, and I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking internal sales, not for me, don't want to liquidate, I don't want to do the external. What are some initial steps I should be taking to get my arms around this idea of the ESOP?
I would try to lay out with the help of somebody that can understand succession and ownership transitions. I would try to understand the runways you're dealing with. Yep. If the runway for ownership and succession are the same, that's one thing. If they can be separated and you've got one runway for ownership and a longer runway for succession. And
you're basically meaning there the timeline.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So runway for ownership and succession, try and work out what those are and hopefully distinguish the ownership from the leadership.
Yeah, they're not necessarily married together. And I think so often, one of the reasons I think that especially construction people don't do a lot of good succession planning is we're taught how to build things, right? And there's not much amplitude in the feedback when you tell a pile of dirt to sit down, right? It sits down, you push it over. But when all of a sudden you start talking about all the various nuances and the personalities involved in succession, I don't think we're equipped to deal with that very well.
Okay.
The amplitude of that feedback that comes back is much higher, and I just feel like we're not very good at it. So that's
explain that a little bit more.
Okay, trying to figure out who's going to take your place, who's going to take that place, and you put 3 or 4 or 5 people, you queue them up, and you see who comes into play, and what might happen, what could happen is, there could be a little bit of a mutiny. Yeah. And I think we just avoid that because we work with compliant things. We work with excavators that dig where you tell them to dig. We work with dirt that goes where you dump it. And so I don't think we're as good at that difference in amplitude of the feedback we get and what can potentially happen. Is somebody going to leave because they got overlooked? If, that's the kind of thing. So we just put it off. And separating the ownership and the management succession, to me, simplify that process.
Okay, excellent.
So
that's one thing. What's
look at
another thing?
that. I want to know the why.
The why. Okay.
The why. Is the why because you want to, cash out, take chips off the table? Is the why because you want to help your employees? Is the why because you want to perpetuate the business because the business does good things in the world?
Mm-hmm.
For me, those are the reasons I wanted to perpetuate it.
Yep.
And then I would go to a number of National Center for Employee Ownership conventions, and I would find a mentor in my specific business arena. So to me, if you're a vertical builder, don't come to Herb Sargent as a mentor for your business because it's two totally different businesses. So you need to find a mentor that can help, that's got 10, 12, 15 years behind them in the business and do due diligence for your employees through that process.
Okay. So I've got this, you got to separate out the runway for the ownership and the management succession, get clear on the why, attend a number of national conferences to get comfortable with the idea, and then find a mentor in your particular niche market, specifically your construction niche market. And I really like the idea of transparency that you had. You're doing your due diligence so you understand the process, and therefore you can communicate it transparently to your employees.
Yeah, I felt like we've always had a really good relationship with our employees. My grandfather did, my father did. I've always had a good relationship with them. And there's a number of things that come into play. As an example, when gas prices spiked back in whatever it was, 2007, 8, we went to our people and we said, we're going to give you more money per mile to travel above and beyond what the feds give you. But when gas drops below 350, we're going to take it back.
Right.
So we did that. And I said, we're going to have a mutiny when we take it back. And when we took it back, that's what you said you were going to do. Right. So we really have worked hard to build credibility with our crew. And I think, that level of trust back and forth is really what helped people understand. I had a lot of people come to me and say, you've never led us wrong before.
Yeah. So let me just, in closing, I do want to take a step back and just explore a little bit more for a couple of minutes here, this management succession, because I know that is the heaviest lift for most construction companies, is someone in your position finding your successor.
It is.
So tell me about your journey specifically to finding your successor as the CEO of the company.
So specifically in our company, we had a chief operating officer who retired about 18 months ago, Tim Folster, and he had let me know about a year before that he wanted to retire. And we had a number of people, and we kind of took stock of what we had. We had an individual that was fairly new to the company. He had been with another national company for about 15 years. And we brought him in to run our materials division, which is our asphalt and ready mix.
Yep.
And just found that he did an incredible job managing people, just really on point with communicating, with understanding that we can't let everything go. We've got to address issues. Excellent with that sort of stuff. Really good communicator. And so when Tim decided to retire, we decided to bring Eric in. His name's Eric Ritchie, into that role. And so he's now our chief operating officer. And so he's 40 years old. And our CFO, Tasha Gardner's, if I said her age, she'd be mad at me, but she's just a kid. But she and I have actually worked together for about 30 years. She was my outside accountant before.
Okay.
So just really I feel so fortunate for our employee owners and for our company that these two folks are here working with me. And I've never been more confident of our ability to get through, the succession.
Uh-huh. So you're comfortable that you have folks in place at the moment who can take your responsibilities when you choose to move yourself out of the company?
They could do it better than I can.
Excellent. Well, Herb, you've been very generous with your time and your insights here today. A question I like to ask my guests, you're up there in Stillwater, Maine, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if I ever happen to be in Stillwater for whatever reason, or one of our guests does, what's the one restaurant we should go check out?
Oh, let's see. My favorite one is Mason's Brewery.
Uh-huh.
And that's the one place. It's in Brewer, Maine. You won't get a lobster there, though.
Uh-huh.
So if you want a lobster, you're just going to have to go to the coast.
No problem.
Get one. Yeah.
But we got Mason's Brewery Company, and that's over by or in Brewer, Maine. I got it right here. We'll put the link in the show notes just in case someone's up there sometime. I really appreciate your time here, Herb. It's been great having you on the show, and I do wish you all the best as you continue to go through the ESOP journey with your company.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about it. And as I mentioned, I've spoken with literally dozens of people about ESOPs from across the country, and it's something I've got a lot of passion about. I don't know how to set one up. I don't know the details, but I feel like culturally, I can tell if somebody fits.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes to your website, and appreciate you being so generous here today.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Today's episode was brought to you by the Construction Conclave. If you as a construction leader would like to develop your skills and get involved in a community of like-minded construction professionals who are focused on building healthy teams, profitable projects, and long-term successful businesses, then the Construction Conclave is for you. It's a private, invitation-only group of construction leaders that are focused on developing their leadership skills. We do training every single month online that looks at how to become a better leader in a very practical, straightforward way. We also have other events that build community and camaraderie so that you can associate with others who are interested in developing their skills as leaders. If you'd like more information and to see if you qualify for participating in the conclave, feel free to reach out to me, eric@ericanderton.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and thanks again for listening.